It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into a bonus episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Why a bonus episode today, Ross? Well, the New Orleans Saints have released their unofficial depth chart ahead of their first preseason game, which kicks off tomorrow at 6 p.m. Central Time against the Baltimore Ravens. So I want to go ahead and break it down. We're going to start off with the offensive skill positions, then we'll jump into the trenches and then wrap up with defense and special teams, talking about the surprises, the not so surprising moments, and everything you need to know about the New Orleans Saints unofficial depth chart ahead of preseason game 1. As always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, co-managing editor over at CanalStreetChronicles.com, and your Tuesday co-host over the National Locked On NFL podcast. We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints, your team every day. All right, family, just real quick, want to make sure that we talk about this. It is an unofficial depth chart. This is about poll places, essentially, right? Where are these guys starting? Where are they coming from? And there are still some things that need to be updated as well. Just for instance, Quentin Poling and Jalen McCleskey both still listed on this unofficial depth chart. Jalen McCleskey, of course, sent to injured reserve, expected to get an injury waiver and hit the market in the near future. He will not be playing for the New Orleans Saints on Saturday, but he's still on this depth chart. Quentin Poling was waived with an injury waiver. He is somebody that's not going to be on the team either, but is on this depth chart. Lawrence Woods was re-signed and brought back. Shout out. Very excited about that. And it makes a lot of sense because you lost Jalen McCleskey, who is going to be a special teamer for you, gunner, punt returner, kick returner. You can see Lawrence Woods with that same type of ability. So we know that this is an unofficial depth chart. Things are in flux, and this really just gives you kind of the starting places from which more changes can happen. Now, the big question everybody wants to know, who's listed as a starting quarterback on the unofficial depth chart? The answer is no one, because at the moment, the way that it's listed, Taysom Hill or Jameis Winston. So still no clarity at this time, unsurprisingly, around who the starting quarterback is. We'll probably get to know that Saturday before the game. Interestingly enough, though, Trevor Siemian still listed ahead of Ian Book on this unofficial depth chart, but might have more to do with seniority, might have more to do with NFL experience than it has to do with anything else. A couple of interesting placements amongst this roster. If you see me, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm looking over here, it's just because I'm looking at the roster. Michael Thomas, of course, still listed at number 1 because even though he's not on the roster and he's not available to you, he's still your number 1 receiver. Traquan Smith listed as the number 2 opposite him. Marquez Callaway right behind Michael Thomas. Deontay Harris behind Traquan Smith. And then you sort of have that next tier of receivers with Lil Jordan Humphrey, Chris Hogan, and Jake Lampman all sort of sliding into the X side of all this, Michael Thomas' side of the field. And then you have Ty Montgomery, Kawan Baker, Tommy Lee Lewis, and Aesop Winston all on sort of the Z side of all of this. And some of those players would also be slot receivers for you as well. So nothing really big there that stands out. On the tight end position, here's something that stood out to me. Adam Troutman, Nick Vanette, tight end 1, tight end 2, makes perfect sense. But Garrett Griffin is listed as the 3rd tight end on this list ahead of Juwan Johnson. This is in line with the way that I projected the actual 53-man roster, but not the way that I project it now, right? That was my initial projection, was that Garrett Griffin was going to be ahead of Juwan Johnson. Now I've moved Juwan Johnson ahead, as have many media members across New Orleans, moved Juwan Johnson ahead as the 3rd tight end. It's going to be very exciting to see him on Saturday and see him out on the field, especially because all of these quarterbacks have gotten very comfortable with him, Ian Book included. Right behind Juwan Johnson, of course, Ethan Wolf, and then the recently signed Josh Peterson, who was brought in after the New Orleans Saints had to move on from a couple of other players on the roster. Now let's take a look here at the running back position to wrap up skill position players. We're going to come back and talk trenches here in a little bit, but the running back one is about what we expected. Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray, you know what you've got there, number 1, number 2. But as we expected, Devontae Freeman already at running back 3. His pole position, his starting position here is ahead of Dwayne Washington, who is number 4. And then right behind him, of course, is, I want to make sure I get the order right here, Tony Jones Jr. and then Stevie Scott. Now, I expect you're going to see a lot more Tony Jones Jr. and Stevie Scott throughout this preseason game, as opposed to the top four, because the top four all have the opportunity to make the roster. And then just to wrap up running back, I want to make sure I fold in fullback here, Alex Arma and Sutton Smith. Alex Arma ahead of Sutton Smith, as we would imagine. Expect to see a lot of Tony Jones Jr., expect to see a lot of Stevie Scott, because those are the guys that you need to figure out a little bit more about. And then I expect you'll see quite a bit of Alex Arma and Sutton Smith as well, because the Saints will be running some things that are a little bit vanilla over on the offensive side, so you can expect them to see some fullback play get involved in that, particularly late in the game. But Devontae Freeman already at running back number 3. So just a quick review, a couple of things surprising. Devontae Freeman, number 3 at the running back position. Trevor Siemian, number 3 at the quarterback position. But Juwan Johnson, number 4 in the tight end position. I expect that we'll see that climb and change even potentially before the game actually gets started on Saturday. All right, coming up next, we're going to go to the trenches. We're going to talk offensive line and then defensive line, who's ahead of who is where. We'll talk all about it, as well as one big surprise when it comes to rookie Peyton Turner. So you want to stick around for that. But I want to let you know, as always, real quick, before we get to that, today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at BuiltBar.com or Built.com if you want to check out all of the expansive products that they have. But my recommendation is to make sure you check out those Built Bars, the protein bars that taste like a candy bar, the best protein bar ever put on the market. 9 incredible flavors that you know you can always rely on that include coconut, coconut almond, mint brownie, peanut butter brownie, salted caramel, cookies and cream. All these flavors that sound like they should be absolutely loaded with chocolate. Loaded with sugar. 4 or 5 grams of sugar. But you know I got chocolate on the mind because these are also covered in 100% chocolate, despite that low calorie, low sugar, low net carb count that you're going to find with these protein bars. And right now, for a limited time, you can find the Rocky Road Bar up as well. So I highly suggest you go and check that out. Get yourself a sample box as well, so you can try 2 of each of all the 9 flavors. You can check it out over at Built.com. And don't forget to use the promo code LOCKED15, especially for you Locked On listeners. Locked15 is going to get you 15% off of not just your first box, but whatever you purchase. And your first purchase, second purchase, third purchase, doesn't matter. It's going to get you 15% off of your next purchase over at Built.com. All right, Houdat Nation, continuing on with this bonus episode of Locked On Saints. Thank you very much for joining me on this Friday evening / Saturday morning ahead of the Saints' first preseason game, which again kicks off at 6 p.m. Central Time up against the Baltimore Ravens. We talked about the offensive skill positions. Now, let's get to the big uglies. Let's get to the hog mollies, as Dave Gettleman would say up in New York. Let's get to the trenches. Want to start off with your starting 5 on the offensive line. No big surprises here. At left tackle, it's Teron Armstead. At left guard, it's Andrus Peat. At center, it's Eric McCoy. At right guard, it is Cesar Ruiz. And at right tackle, it is Ryan Ramczyk. No surprises there at all. Landon Young right now, they said that when they brought him in, they were going to get him some work at right tackle. Right now, he is your 3rd string right tackle, which is behind Ryan Ramczyk and also behind Ethan Greenidge. They brought in Kyle Murphy, a veteran that's been around the NFL for a little while. It struggled a bit through camp. He right now is behind, no surprise, James Hurst at left tackle. We saw that at camp, that James Hurst was always the one that was playing in place of Teron Armstead when Teron Armstead was getting his vet rest. Then you've got guys like J.R. Sweezy, who were recently signed and has a really good opportunity to make the roster. Think of him as like an upgraded Nick Easton, essentially. He right now is listed as the backup left guard. Exactly what Nick Easton was doing. Calvin Throckmorton behind him. Fingers crossed for him. You know that we're a big fan of Calvin Throckmorton here at the show. Backup center is Will Clapp. Right behind him, Christian Montano. So you got a lot of local flavor when it comes to the center position. Will Clapp, of course, from LSU. Christian Montano, of course, from Tulane. And then Derek Kelly is your backup right guard with Michael Brown, an undrafted free agent out of West Virginia, right behind him. So again, nothing really big and sort of headlining about the offensive line. It will be interesting, though, to get a look at some of those very talented but young offensive linemen on Saturday and really throughout these 3 preseason games. Now, let's get to the fun part, the defensive line, which does have some nice little surprises here. I mentioned a little bit of a surprise with Peyton Turner. Peyton Turner right now behind both Marcus Davenport and Carl Granderson, listed as a 3rd string right defensive end. Now, Peyton Turner's been taking a lot of snaps in place of Cam Jordan, so I actually expected him to be the backup to Cam Jordan at maybe the 2nd spot or maybe even the 3rd spot there, but they've actually got him on the same side as Marcus Davenport, but with Carl Granderson ahead. Now, some of this, again, could be seniority conversation, things like that, just like we discussed with one of the earlier positions at quarterback, but this is still something to keep an eye out on because Peyton Turner has had a standout camp so far. What is he going to look like if he's able to hit the field on Saturday? If not on Saturday, then later on in the preseason. Just a reminder, He and Pete Werner both left practice a few days ago early, didn't return. Now, Sean Payton on Thursday wouldn't rule them out, so we just need to see if they're actually going to hit the field there. But we'll swing back around to Pete Werner and the linebacker spot. Let's continue on with the defensive line. Let's just jump across the line and go to the right defensive end, since we kind of talked about that already, or excuse me, the left defensive end. So we've got Cam Jordan, of course, as your starter. Tano Passanio right now is the second guy, and then right behind him is Marcus Willoughby. Interestingly enough, Noah Spence is not listed as a defensive end. We're actually going to get to him in the third segment because he's listed as an off-ball linebacker over on the strong side. So those are your 6 edge rushers, essentially, in the way that they have them broken out. On one side, Marcus Davenport, Carl Granderson, Peyton Turner. On the other side, Cam Jordan, Tano Passanio, and Marcus Willoughby. Now, let's get to the interior, because this is probably where the most interesting part of this conversation is. On the interior, your 2 interior starting first team, if you will, interior defensive linemen. David Onyemata, no surprise there. Remember, he's suspended for the first few games of the season, first 6 games, but he is able to participate both in training camp as well as the preseason. So he's listed right now as one of your starting defensive tackles, no surprise there. However, next to him, where I expected to see Shy Tuttle's name before camp, is actually Malcolm Roach. So this is where things get a little bit interesting. Where is Shy Tuttle? Now, we saw Shy Tuttle's snaps kind of fall back a little bit throughout training camp. I don't think there's anything too much to be concerned about here. We know that he's somebody that has progressively developed. Maybe they're just getting more looks at some of these younger guys, and then you want to see that in the preseason as well. But right now, Malcolm Roach is listed as the starting defensive tackle next to David Onyemata. Behind Malcolm Roach is Christian Ringo, who we've talked about a lot. Remember, UL, he's a raging Cajun from Jackson, Mississippi, from the area, went to school in the state, and then now is trying to make an impact on the New Orleans Saints. And it's behind Christian Ringo that you find Shy Tuttle's name, third string defensive tackle at the moment on this unofficial depth chart. Again, doesn't say anything about the regular season, but it is interesting nonetheless. Behind David Onyemata at the other defensive tackle spot, Jalen Dalton, which we completely expected. Big number 77 has had a great camp so far. Albert Huggins, and then undrafted free agent rookie Josiah Bronson from UW, the Huskies over in Washington. So interesting piece there, particularly on the interior to see Shy Tuttle so far back. Will be very interesting to see how he either climbs back up or how much this doesn't actually indicate how they feel about Shy Tuttle, just how they want to get a look at some of these players throughout the rest of camp / the preseason. All right, coming up next, we're going to get to the linebackers, cornerbacks, safeties, special teams, all that good stuff. Get into some of the big surprises here. One of the big surprises here in terms of where Quan Alexander is listed. So we'll talk about all of this as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Now, as a betting man, I will say that I bet very strongly that this unofficial depth chart is not going to be representative of what the actual 53-man roster is going to be. And I will even go so far as to say the initial 53-man roster won't look like the week 1 53-man roster. Remember, there's a week in between all of that happening. So it's going to be really interesting to see that. You can't bet on that right now over at betonline.ag, but if it was there, I definitely bet on that because I feel that strongly about the way that these things are going to continue to change. And I feel that strongly about our partners over at betonline.ag that they're the only place that I'm going to go to put down a bet anyway. So go and check them out as well. Highly recommend it. betonline.ag. Everything that you could imagine over there for the NFL, for the NBA, MLB, NBA as it rolls back around. But you can even get in on some futures, some early MVP odds are out, all that good stuff. So go and check them out over at betonline.ag. Don't forget to use the promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, so you can get a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's promo code LOCKEDON to get a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit over at BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Now we get to the fun part of the defense here where we get to answer a lot of questions. Where is Paulson Adebo? Who's the starting corner opposite Marshawn Lattimore? Where is Quan Alexander? These young linebackers. We get to answer all those questions, at least on this unofficial depth chart. Remember, it's all about pole positions more than it is really about actual finite and final analysis in terms of where these guys are going to play. So let's start off with the linebackers here. We'll start with the will linebacker position next to Demario Davis. Demario Davis, of course, is your starting Mike, right? No change there. He's your starting middle linebacker. Right next to him, though, at the will linebacker position, Quan Alexander. This is interesting to me because this is an unofficial depth chart. So you could put Quan Alexander a little bit further back because of the fact that you know that he's not going to be available to you very likely for the opening preseason game. I don't even know if he's going to be available to you on the preseason. I don't even know if he's going to be available to you week 1. But we know that if Quan Alexander is healthy, he's the starting linebacker next to Demario Davis. New Orleans Saints just confirming that a little bit. Maybe let's say acknowledging that a little bit at this spot. Now, the interesting thing is, Quan Alexander's probably not going to hit the field on Saturday, or at least I'm pretty confident he's not going to hit the field on Saturday. We'll see. Could be very interesting if he does. Who's behind him? Is it Zach Bond? Is it Pete Werner? Well, it's neither and it's both, because it's listed again, Zach Bond or Pete Werner, just like we saw with Taysom Hill or Jameis Winston. So still some decisions to be made there. Once again, just as a reminder, Pete Werner, not sure if he's going to be available on Saturday, so you might see Zach Bond in that will linebacker spot. And right behind them is Andrew Dowell, who we talked about a bunch, has had a great standout camp. All right, let's go to the middle of the defense here, middle of the second level, Demario Davis. Right behind him is Chase Hansen, who's had a really nice camp. Wynton McManus is right behind him. And then on this roster is listed Quentin Poling, but as we mentioned, he was waived earlier on Friday, and then that roster spot was filled by the signing of Lawrence Woods. So your middle linebackers there are Demario Davis, Chase Hansen, and Wynton McManus. Now we get to the Sam linebacker spot, which remember we only saw, I'll say a few handfuls of times during the 2020 season, them actually come out there in base defense. But I think you're going to see a good bit of base defense, some vanilla defense, if you will, for the New Orleans Saints. So that's going to give Caden Ellis an opportunity, who right now is listed as the starting Sam linebacker. Right behind him is undrafted free agent out of Maryland, Shaq Smith. And then, interestingly enough, Noah Spence. Now, this role, the Sam linebacker role, has always sort of been for the Saints over the past couple of years, a role that blitzes a ton. They come in and they help be a fifth pass rusher off the line of scrimmage. They play closer to the line of scrimmage. They're not really in coverage. They're a bit of run stoppers, helping us at the edge. A lot of different responsibilities than like the will linebacker who's trying to cover the flats and carry tight ends up the seam and all that good stuff. So Noah Spence being listed here makes sense. But I love the adjustment because Noah Spence is a speed rusher. So if you're going to give him the opportunity to come off the edge, potentially untouched, that's the way to do it, is blitz him from the linebacker spot from the second level. So I love seeing him as that strong side or Sam linebacker. But we love seeing Caden Ellis get some love at the starting role here. All right, let's go to cornerbacks. Who is it? You know what I'm talking about. Marshawn Lattimore is cornerback number 1, listed as right cornerback for the New Orleans Saints. Who's the starter opposite him on this unofficial depth chart, especially after Patrick Robinson has retired? Drum roll. I don't know if you can hear that. It's my fingers doing a drum roll. Ken Crawley. Ken Crawley is listed as the starting cornerback opposite Marshawn Lattimore. Stop. This is no surprise, right? He's the veteran in the room. He's the guy that knows the system. He's also the guy that's had an outstanding camp so far. So now, during the preseason, you get to see, is this 2017 Ken Crawley we're talking about again all of a sudden? Or is this 2018 Ken Crawley who allowed over a 140 passer rating when targeted? Only time will tell. We'll find out very soon, depending upon when you're watching this. You might be finding out right now. You might already know, as far as I know. But when it comes down to it, Ken Crawley right now is listed opposite Marshawn Lattimore. Now, directly behind Marshawn Lattimore is third-round rookie Paulson Adebo. I made mention of this already. He has been playing a ton during camp with the second team. When he's not playing first team opposite Marshawn, he's playing second team in place of Marshawn at that right cornerback position. So what that indicates to you is that if Marshawn does end up with a suspension, I keep saying Marshawn like I know him. If Marshawn Lattimore, I've talked to him in press conferences, but I ain't never met the homie. Like, he's not the homie. I can't just call him Marshawn. Anyway, Marshawn Lattimore is, if he ends up with a suspension to start off the season, then Paulson Adebo and Ken Crawley could very well be your starting corners, unless, of course, the New Orleans Saints, who were still filling the cornerback spot a must before Patrick Robinson retired, unless they go out there and then bring in another cornerback, which seems very, very likely. All right, behind Ken Crawley is Brian Poole. I really look at him probably as another slot corner for you. His role becomes a little bit more clear, and his road to the roster becomes a little bit more clear, especially after the Patrick Robinson retirement, because Brian Poole becomes your backup slot corner behind CJ Gardner-Johnson. Makes perfect sense. Kavari Russell is listed as your third cornerback on that side. Interestingly enough, 5 cornerbacks listed over on the right side. So you got Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, as we discussed. Prince Amukamara right behind them. Back to number 21 after Patrick Robinson's retirement. Grant Haley, shout out Haley Hive, Deuce Wyndham, all the folks over at Who Dat Confessional, we love you. The Grant Haley is listed at number 4, and then Adonis Alexander, the 6'3" Adonis himself, is listed as the 5th cornerback over on that side. And then let's wrap it all up here on the defense with safety. Malcolm Jenkins, Marcus Williams are your starters. Backup strong safeties are CJ Gardner-Johnson, who's really your slot safety, JT Gray and Deuce Wallace. That makes perfect sense. Behind Marcus Williams is PJ Williams at the free safety slot at the second string, third string Bryce Thompson, and then fourth string Eric Burrell. no real surprises there. However, it's cool to see Bryce Thompson in the mix here, considering that he just transitioned from corner to safety, and it's really been working for him. So you do, as they say, you'll have to see it. You'll have to see it. All right, now let's take a look at special teams here. The only real big thing to really point out here is that right now, Blake Gillikin, unsurprisingly, is listed as the starting punter in front of Nolan Cooney, who right now is listed as second string. Will Lutz is still seen as the starting kicker as well as kickoff specialist ahead of Brent Maher, and that just has to do with the fact that, like, we know that that's not really the case because Will Lutz is going to miss time at the beginning of the season, but we also know Will Lutz is your absolute starter. And then for your return specialists, exact same order on punt return and kick return: Deontay Harris, Marquez Callaway, Tommy Lee Lewis. No big surprises there, although I do hope that Lawrence Woods begins to creep up into that conversation, because if Marquez Callaway is going to be your starting receiver and your number one option basically to start the season, and if Deontay Harris isn't available, I don't really want to see Marquez Callaway returning kicks and punts while also being out there and trying to lead this team as a number one or a number two receiver, depending upon how long Traquan Smith is out. So, all right, y'all, that is a very quick rundown of the New Orleans Saints unofficial depth chart ahead of preseason game 1. This dropped midday, evening-ish rather, on Friday, trying to get this out to you Friday night ahead of Saturday's matchup. So keep an eye out for more, because we will be back with a quick recap after the game right here on Locked On Saints. So don't miss that. And of course, we'll be right back with you on Monday with our updated 53-man roster projection. And then Tuesday, we're talking about the cuts that are upcoming. Wednesday, reviewing the cuts that did happen. Remember, the cut deadline, they dropped 5 by 4 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday. So much to continue to track as we are just getting started here with this grind on Locked On Saints. I appreciate you all for being here. Don't forget, for everything in between, you can find me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust to that nation. I'll holla at you.